We've been looking at Nehemiah and examining Nehemiah in the goal of discussing building together brick by brick and looking at Nehemiah and his example of leadership, the attitude and the spirit of the community in the situation he found himself in. You know, I was thinking about his story and I was thinking about my experience about 18 years ago. I had made great plans. My wife and I, we were moving to Harlingen. And we had been discussing it for over a year. And we had made commitments and we made plans. And we got a U-Haul. And we took our stuff to Harlingen. And I remember walking in Sunday morning. Now keep in mind, I had been there many times. But I remember walking in and going, what did I get myself into? And I imagine as Nehemiah went through the process we discussed yesterday, how that he saw the need, he heard the need rather, of the destruction of the walls around Jerusalem and the outcry from those that were scattered about and the desire to rebuild those walls. And he took that to heart and he mourned and he wept over the state of Jerusalem and the walls around Jerusalem. He went from mourning and weeping to prayerful consideration and fasting to get the courage to stand up and to speak to the Persian king. And not only to ask for permission to go, but he asked for timber and he asked for station and placement so he'd have the authority to go and to do this task. And he showed great courage. And I can imagine as Nehemiah is going through this process, he is determined. He believes, he has confidence, but he gets down to Jerusalem. And he says, I'm going to go look at these walls. And it says in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 11, it says, so I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And then verse 15, it says, then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. Nehemiah needed to see what he got himself into. Up until that point, it had only been rumor or information from others, reports of others, but he put his eyes on the wall to see the state and the condition of that wall. You know, an inspection serves a very important process. And if you've ever bought a home, you've hired a home inspector, most likely, to go in to look at the home. And you may love the home. You may think it's a great home, but you want to know what you're really buying, don't you? You want to know if the electrical outlets work. You want to know if there's a leak in the roof. You want to know certain aspects about the foundation because you want to know what you're getting yourself into. Nehemiah is there to inspect and to see the condition of the walls. And as he looked and he examined the condition of the walls, I'm sure certain things came into his mind. How am I going to get rid of this rubble? How am I going to get the workers and the workforce and get everything that I need to accomplish this task? Where are they going to come from? What's going to happen? He had faith. He had confidence. But he needed a plan. And he needed to look at that wall and inspect the wall so he knew what kind of plan he would need. What he could build around. What he could build to. What parts of the wall were still salvageable. What parts of the wall were completely destroyed. What rocks that were rubble could be reused. He had to contemplate all those things in inspecting and looking at that wall. You know, we think about the inspection that we're going to discuss this evening. Christ has already purchased his church. So let's be clear. This is not like Jesus is inspecting us so he can determine whether or not he's going to follow through with the transaction. The money's already at the title house, folks. He has purchased the church. It's already a done deal. He died for the church. He purchased the church. It is his. But we need to take time to inspect ourselves, inspect the work that we're involved in, so that we can make determination and have an honest evaluation of our situation and our team. I think it's important that we have an honest evaluation. And as we go through these things, I want us to think about the team that's here. What are the things that are strong? What are the things that could use some help? What are some things that are good and great? And what are some things that are disappointing? And we need to be honest in evaluating those things. We need to be honest about evaluating the talent that's around us and the leadership and the service and those that are involved in different aspects. Romans chapter 12 verse 3 says, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. We're going to take some time to evaluate our situation, our place, our roles, our talents, our weaknesses individually and as a team. And that may be picking the scab a little bit. It's not my intention this evening to pick on anybody. And you may make an assumption or two after the lesson, but please don't make any assumptions. Talk to me. In fact, at the end of the service, I'm going to put my phone number up there to make sure you have access, to make it easy to discuss any concerns you might have about anything I might have said. You know, having a good team is of great importance. And when I rolled up into Harlingen, I can tell you, we didn't have a fantastic team to start with. We had willing participants, but we didn't have clear leaders that were set in place. At that time, we had, counting Lacey and I and an infant Addison, 14 people in that congregation. Of those people that were there when we moved there, as of today, there are only 3 that are still alive or with us in the congregation. Many have passed. Others have moved and are supporting the work in other places. But there's only 3, I joke, there's only 3 more tenured than Addison, who's 18, in that congregation. Last Sunday, not yesterday, I don't know how many we had yesterday. Last Sunday, we had 96 people in that congregation. Sunday before, which was the kickoff of our meeting, so it's a little inflated, we had over 120, 130 people. But consistently, having between 80 and 100 people consistently, you know, that didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears of people that came to be a part and bought into a vision. So let's talk about a team. You know, probably the greatest team I have ever witnessed in my life was a 1992 Olympic basketball team. Most people, if you were to ask, what's the name of this team? You wouldn't say the U.S. basketball team. You'd call it the Dream Team. All other teams from 1992 on, in any sport, has been compared to the Dream Team. Why? Because you had the greatest, I don't care any LeBron fans, the greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan, heading up a team of all-time great players, and Christian Laettner. This was a great team. This was an all-star of all-stars. This was the Dream Team. And imagine Michael Jordan with a team so superior, so great. And we look at that and we say, man, why can't we have this? Why can't we have this team? And you might consider yourself Michael Jordan this evening. And you might think, I am a person of great talent. You might say, I'm surrounded by a great team, or I've got a great team. But let's be realistic, folks. This is more likely the teams we're a part of. And just as a newsflash, you're not Michael Jordan. You see, this team saved the galaxy, but that's a whole nother story. But you know what this team is? This team is a great representation of what we found in Harlingen, Texas. Another illustration I might use is the island of misfit toys. And we owned it. We owned that. We had people that were not necessarily leaders in the places they came from. They weren't seen as leaders, but they moved to work and get a job, and they grew into a role. We had people that came from all different walks. Up until very recently, there was no one in the congregation that was related to anyone else in the congregation except for the children in the congregation. We were an odd group. And you know, there's nothing really that wrong with that, if we're going to be honest. Every congregation needs a little Tasmanian devil in them. Every congregation needs a little Elmer Fudd, a little Bugs, and a little Daffy. Because honestly, if we would examine ourselves with true and transparent hearts, we're going to see that we are not special ourselves. There's nothing special about your talent this evening that makes you useful to God. Nothing about it. God uses you for not your talent, but in your weakness, that he can be magnified. You see, in Matthew chapter 9, verses 11 through 13, if Jesus wanted an all-star dream team when he was walking on this earth, he could have had it. But who did he call? It says, and when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? But when he heard it, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. You see, Jesus had every opportunity to rally around and bring kings and high authority leaders and the chief priests and all of those, but that's not who he went and called. He called the sinners because the sinners needed Jesus. And as we discussed yesterday, when the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus empowered his team to go work. He didn't need them to go get the loaves and the fishes, but he allowed them to work. He gave them a job. He gave them responsibility. Jesus did not come on this earth to be Michael Jordan of a dream team. He came to save the lost and to work with those that would follow him. When Jesus said, follow me, he expected them to be fully committed. He expected them to be a part of something greater than themselves. And as we have honest evaluation and inspection of the work that's being done here in Tulsa or in other neighboring congregations or back in Harlingen, I can tell you, we need to stop relying on our natural talent or our abilities we think we have, but instead put our talent in the hands of the Lord and trust him to use us to his glory. You see, he's called us into something greater than ourselves. He's called us to be a part of a body. And a body functions under the authority of the head. Your arms and your legs don't walk and move about freely without impulses from the brain. Now, sometimes they do, and you know what that is? That's an illness. That's a disease. That's something wrong. If your body is not responding to the impulses of the brain, but something else, we say, hey, we need to get them in the hospital. Something's wrong. And the body is responding or is responsible to follow the head, which is Christ. In Ephesians chapter 1, verse 22, it says, and hath put all things under his feet and gave him to be the head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him that filleth all in all. Jesus has called us to be a part of that body, under his headship, under his authority. And as being called into that body, we serve the body, and we serve as a function of service. We're not there to be a parasite in the body, but we're there to provide nourishment. We're there to provide things to others. In Ephesians chapter 4:16 says, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted, by which every joint supplieth according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh the increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. Now then, Jesus called us to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. He's called us to be a part of that body. So how are we going to examine our role? You know, sometimes I talk to people and they say, I don't even know what my role is. I don't even know what I'm good at. I don't even know my talents. My wife says it best. She'll say, I don't know if this is my talent or not, but it's a job that needs to get done, and she just goes and does it. She looks for opportunities. Now, she is a wonderfully talented lady, but she's not basing her decision on whether or not she thinks she's good at it. We can't. We have to be willing to serve. We have to be willing to be part of that body. And part of that's inspecting ourselves. As Nehemiah looked at that wall and he looked at the challenges that were in front of him, he had to contemplate what he was going to do next. How is he going to respond to the inspection report? How is he going to respond to the news that he might get from this inspection? In the same way, we need to be ready to respond. In Psalm 139, verses 23 through 25 says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. You know, sometimes when you dig deep and you really inspect your own heart and your own life, you're not going to like what you see. You're not going to like what you find. And the truth is, I have done that. And I have been very disappointed in what I've discovered. But we have to, so we can be better and we be more equipped Sometimes when we look inwardly and we examine, we find out our problem is not that someone else is doing it wrong, but we have an issue of pride because our way is the best way. And our way is the only way. And I'll tell you, it's been hard. And part of my journey as an evangelist in Harlingen was coming to a point where we ordained elders and it wasn't my responsibility anymore. And I would have to submit to those elders, and those elders would make decisions sometimes and say, there's a better way. But at the end of the day, they were held responsible, and they had to make those decisions. And that wasn't easy. What about jealousy? What about when we look and we say, well, that person, gets to do that job, or that person has this role, and I wish I had that role. I wish I could do that job. Why can't I be asked to do this? And sometimes when we inspect ourselves, we see that it's jealousy that's the issue. That our hearts aren't really fully committed to service. And we have jealousy, or we have pride, we have those things that are keeping us from being fully committed to the needs of the body. C.S. Lewis, great author, just a man, but a great author, talks about how that in the Christian journey, he makes the point, I think it was Screw Tape Letters, if I remember correctly, that our Christianity should be so strong that when something good happens to someone else, we should have the same sense of joy as if it happens to us. And I'm butchering the phrase. But we should feel just as in awe of God working when it happens for someone else than it happens for us. I can tell you, I'm not there yet. I still have jealousy. I still have struggles. I see things and I go, well, why don't I have that opportunity? Why haven't I been asked to do this? Because my heart's not ready for it. And God's going to keep working on my heart, and God's going to keep working on your heart until it's made for His use. Sometimes our heart needs to go back in the oven and bake a little longer. Not like those cookies this morning, because those were perfect. But sometimes our heart needs a little bit more time to mature and to grow and develop and be ready for His use. But we need to implore the Lord to come and search our heart and to try us. Sometimes this self-reflection involves testing. 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 3 says, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves, or do you not realize this about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you? Indeed, unless you fail to meet the test. What does it mean to test yourselves? I can tell you, I could not give you any idea how much I could pole vault. I really don't know. You know why? I've never tried to pole vault. I couldn't tell you about a long jump. I couldn't tell you how far I jump. You know why? I've never tried. I've never tested myself to have that. I can tell you I can't dunk a basketball. I can tell you that. You know why? Because I've tried. And I failed the test. I could probably guess Rusty can't dunk a basketball either, but that's another story. But I can't dunk a basketball. I have failed that test. I've tried it, but I've failed. When we reflect and inspect in our lives, do we see ourselves as pushing ourselves to grow? To pass the test, to try to expand the gifts that God has given us? Or are we content and say, well, I'm never going to be a song leader because I've never led a song. I'm never going to be a preacher because I've never preached a lesson. I'm never going to be a prayer because I've never led a public prayer. I'm never going to be a greeter because I've never been a greeter. I've never sent a prayer card because I've never... You see what I'm getting at? You have to test yourself. You have to try. And then part of that inspection is not just quitting before you get to the starting line. But put yourself to the test. Put yourself to stretch and grow and be prepared to be used in the ways that God can use you. What gifts can you offer that are not currently being utilized? You may think, hey, I think I could do this, but you've never spoken up. Or maybe you've spoken up and it's been disregarded. That happens. I'll tell you, I've done it. I think I've got a pretty good system going. I've got people in the sound booth, and maybe someone says, hey, I could do this, and I don't pay close enough attention. Maybe there's something that you feel like you haven't been heard or you have not been utilized to your fullest ability. Does that mean quit? Maybe it means do something else that you have been asked to do tenfold better than you've done it. Maybe that's where we start. What gifts can be expanded and grown within you? You know, one thing that I strongly encourage, and I spoke with Rusty a little bit this morning. I don't quite understand the cycle, but I understand congregation has gone through a leadership process every 4, 5, 6 years, some period of time, and I don't know when the next one is, but I will encourage every male member to go through that process. And here's why. 3 years ago, I knew I was not ready to be an elder. I was not ready. There were things that I had in my heart that I needed to keep working on. There were some things that as a father and as a husband that I knew that I needed to improve on. And I said to the evangelist that came in, I said, I'm not ready to be an elder. But I know where some of my weaknesses are, but I'm sure I have blind spots. I'm sure there are things that I don't know about myself. I already know I'm not qualified right now, but there may be some blind spots that I'm not seeing. And so whether or not you think you're qualified to be an elder, I encourage you to be considered. And one of two things will happen. One, it will break you. And if it breaks you, then you're no use to God anyway. Or two, it will refine you. And it will make you the man that you ought to be. Because God doesn't want weaklings. God wants to put us to the test and bring us out stronger. And so I strongly encourage that. That's of great value. That helped me tremendously. Because at the end of the day, whether we put ourselves to the test or not, we will be put to the test. Now, some of you are nerds and you know exactly what that image is. Every Friday after Thanksgiving in the Lowry household, we watch Lord of the Rings. This is the one ring. And then the one ring, it's just a ring by day. You can't tell it. It's indistinguishable from other rings. But if you put it in fire, its true identity is revealed. And I think about our true identity. We can mask ourselves. I'll tell you what, I can go anywhere for an hour and a half and be anybody I want to be. And you can too. Now, what happens when your spouse dies? What happens when your child dies? What happens when you lose the job? What happens when you have a conflict at the church? Your truth gets revealed. And you may not test yourself, but the Lord's going to, it says in 1 Corinthians 3:13, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it. Because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. Your work will be revealed. Who you really are will be revealed. Now, whether or not you think you can hide and you can go through life without that being evident, it will be evident. And if not on this life, it will at judgment. And ultimately, there is no second chance. There's no time to self-correct. There's no time to improve and to become right in the sight of God. Nehemiah is looking at this wall, inspecting the wall. And as he's inspecting and as he's considering, it's not only the voice in his head, but there are those that are mocking this concept. Those that are challenging whether or not it can even be done. Nehemiah 4 verses 1 and 3. Now when Sanballat heard that they were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews, and he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in one day? Will they revive the stone? Excuse me. Good dinner. Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that? And Tobiah, the Ammonite, was beside him, and he said, yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. You know what Nehemiah didn't need in that moment? He did not need this. He did not need this. He did not need the detractors who were jeering and against him and pushing out negative words and outcomes. He didn't need that. He had a job to do. And I will tell you, it is hard to do a job successfully when you're not just battling the problem, but you have a crowd around you who are unsupportive of that mission. It's hard to work that way. It's hard to be effective. And Nehemiah could have at that moment even said, you know what, this is too much. This is too much. But you know what? We sometimes find ourselves in that way. I'll tell you, when I moved to Harlingen, we had those that were not causing us joy. We had those that were complaining. Philippians 2:14, do all things without grumbling or disputing. There was disputing and there was grumbling. And it was part of the job. And I get that. But it's sometimes from people you don't expect. And you're like, I thought you saw the vision. I thought you understood what we're trying to do. But they were detractors. And they were grumbling and disputing. And Nehemiah had that. And sometimes we have that within our churches. Sometimes we have people that don't like the way things are going, and they will let you know about it. That doesn't help. It didn't help Nehemiah. Now, does that mean that there isn't constructive criticism or times for honest and open conversations? Absolutely. That's another sermon. That's another sermon. What I'm talking about is those that were jeering, those that were against the mission. I don't believe anybody in this audience today, I don't know everybody, but I'm going to default to everyone has a good and honest heart. That's my default. My default is there's not a single person in this crowd today that doesn't have a good and honest heart. That doesn't mean that we don't complain. It doesn't mean that we don't have our flaws. But we've got a default to a good and honest heart. And they may need to be corrected. So let's not do these things to hurt the work of the Lord. What we really need to focus on is cleaning up our rubble. You know, when Nehemiah saw the situation, there were some, even within the camp, even within Judah, even Jews that were like, it says in Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. So it wasn't just those that were outsiders that were causing problems, but even those in the inside are like, it's just too much. We can't handle it. Now, keep in mind, this is Nehemiah 4 and 10. 4 verses earlier, this is the passage we're reading every night, or we're looking at every night, that they had a mind to work. But sometimes the work just seems like it's too much. And the answer isn't to complain about the work. The answer is to support those that may be struggling. And it starts with looking internally and cleaning up our own rubble. You know, it's a lot easier to clean up a pile, a big mess, when we just look down and take care of what's in front of us. What happens sometimes is someone clears their space and someone else is sitting there complaining about the rubble. They weren't doing their part. Start internally, clean up our own rubble, because once we can clean up our own mess and clean up our attitude and clean up our motivations, we're going to be more effective at supporting the work. In Matthew 7, verse 3 and 5, one of the most misapplied scriptures probably in the world, says, why do you see the speck in your own brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take out the log of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Judge not, lest ye be judged. As people like to paraphrase and cut to the chase. What is this a command of? It is not a command not to judge or to inspect. What he's saying is clean up your own problem first so you can clearly help your brother. So you can clearly help your sister. And I will tell you, if you are overwhelmed with pride, overwhelmed with jealousy, if you are not committed to the cause of Christ, but committed to your own success or acknowledgement or what have you, then you've got to clear that up. Because you're going to be no use to the body until you do. But once you do, you know what you're going to be able to do? You're going to be able to look over at the rubble. Instead of looking at how you can step over someone else, you're going to see what they're dealing with and say, hey, can I give you a hand? Let me help clear yours as well. That's what this is about. It's about being part of a team that when someone is struggling, when they have a speck, you're there to help them as part of that family. But I'll tell you this, it's not going to be easy. It's going to involve a lot of work. It's going to involve a lot of tears. It's going to involve a lot of self-sacrifice. But it's worth it. Now, you may be discouraged. You may look out and you may say, hey, you know, brother so-and-so used to sit on this pew. And I miss them. And I just can't keep moving on. And we just can't. We can't deal with that. All we can deal with is what we have in front of us. Does that mean that we can't love and support and encourage and motivate and try to restore in situations where, as I mentioned Sunday, as a family that we love back in Harlingen that had left, I weep for them, I mourn for them, but I'm not going to let them stop me from continuing to spread the gospel. And that's what we got to do as a community. We've got to have hope that the Lord is going to see us through and that the Lord is going to make us useful for His body. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in the believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. You know, sometimes people say, well, I'm just discouraged. I get it. I'm sad. I get it. I'm confused. I get it. I doubt. I get it. I had a conversation the other day with someone who's really in a crisis of faith. An ongoing conversation there. And they said, I just don't know. I have doubts about God's existence. I have doubts about these things. And this person deeply cares and wants to know and deeply wants to be a Christian, deeply wants to be committed, but has doubts. And I just said, frankly, right or wrong, this is what I said. That's okay. Just stay in the fight. Just keep struggling with that. Just keep struggling and fighting, because that's what the Lord wants. He wants us in the fight. He wants us in the struggle. How many times did He look at His disciples and say, just believe? But what did He do? He loved them anyway. He encouraged them anyway. So have hope. Be in the fight. Don't give up. If you're discouraged, shake it off. Take a day. Reset. But get back at it. It's okay to breathe. It's okay to take a day off. It's okay to let your mind clear. You don't have to shout the answer immediately. Take time, process. All that's fine, but just don't give up. Just stay in the fight. Have hope. And let the hope of the Lord surround you. You know, in the book of Hebrews, we read a chapter of faith. All these people that are witness to the power of God. They witness the power of God working in their lives. And it's illustrated to us as a cloud of witnesses. Hebrews 12:1 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. We can look to the success of those that followed Him in faith. And that's what that means. You know, sometimes we think of this, and I've heard it been preached this. I don't think that's what it means, but I don't think that they're sitting there like cheering us from the heavenly bleachers. That's not what he's talking about here. It's that we are looking at these cloud of witnesses. We are looking up and acknowledging that these victors of faith lived and were honored because of their commitment to God. And we can run the race knowing that. We can run the race knowing that this congregation, which I believe was established in 1963, I only had a few seconds to look at that book. There have been people that have come and gone, or maybe 36, I'm dyslexic, whatever it was. There are people that have come and gone that have bled, that have worked, that have sweated, that have prayed. There are people that have long since passed that have put time and energy. Their knees were sore, their heads hurt, their shoulders ached, and they continue to work for the Lord so that you could be here today. Don't let their memory die in vain. Look at that witness. Look at the evidence of that work that laid the foundation of this place and build upon it. Have hope. Have endurance. He says, lay aside the weights. Stop carrying your baggage like it's a prize. Turn it over to the Lord. And that baggage may be an issue or a problem, but that baggage may be your own successes. Get rid of it, because that doesn't matter. You don't need to carry your trophies around. Be used for God. That means let go of everything else. That's got to be put aside so that you can be used for Him. Because who's got our back? This God is who has our back. This is who is victorious, not us. The God in Isaiah 40, verse 28, which says, have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, He increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength, for they shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. The power of God is for the weak. The power of God is for the outcast. The power of God is not for those that are self-reliant, that are self-sacrificial. I want to follow that God. I want the success that God promises, not through my strength, but through His. We have to have faith. We can't look at the wall and see the rubble and be distracted and disappointed because things don't happen as fast as we think they should. But we got to be consistent in our faith. We've got to change our perspective. You know, part of that inspection process, and I'm not a home inspector, but I've read the reports. I've read several reports through the years. You know, you can have 10 different inspectors. They're going to see 10 different things. It's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's just they're going to see it from different perspectives, at different angles, different things you're looking for. Because if you want to get super nitpicky, nothing is to code. I mean, you can really get after it, right? I mean, if you really want to, you can really make anything miserable. So what do you got to do? You got to change your perspective sometimes. And you got to see as the Lord sees. And what He's going to see is different than what the world will expect. I think about when Moses sent the 12 spies to inspect the land of promise. And when the 12 spies returned, 10 of them saw a force so mighty that they could not overcome it. It says, and they told him, we have come to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. They said, we can't do this. What did they see? They saw giants. They saw strong people, fortified cities. They saw a massive lion that they could not tame because their perspective was wrong. You see, there were two that saw something different. They weren't afraid of the people. They were not fearful. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." And you say, how ridiculous is that? Who would be afraid of that little kitty cat with a lion's mane? And that's exactly what Caleb saw. He didn't see fortified cities. He didn't see giants. He saw a God that can make it happen. And that's the same God that can make it happen here. But you need to reflect and you need to look in your heart and see if you're willing to allow God to make you strong in your weakness. Romans 8:31. When then shall we say to these things, if God is for us, who can be against us? Let that be your rallying cry today. Let that be your rallying cry, that when you inspect the work of the Lord, that you're not weak, that you're not distracted, you're not disgusted, you're not jeering, but you're all in.